And now, coming to you from the classiest radio station on the air, this is...
You know what's mind-blowing? In the early 1990s, a group of underground DJs and producers literally created a new musical language, using nothing but stolen electricity, makeshift radio transmitters, and borrowed equipment. And it changed electronic music forever.
That's fascinating. And what's even more incredible is how this underground movement spawned from just a handful of London neighbourhoods to influence billions of dollars worth of modern music production.
Well, it all started with this track called We Are IE by Lenny D. Ice in 1991. The way they tell it, when this track dropped, it was like someone had opened a portal to the future of electronic music. Nobody had heard anything like those chopped up breakbeats combined with those deep, chest-rattling bass lines.
So what exactly made this sound so revolutionary at the time?
You know, it was this perfect storm of technical innovation and cultural fusion. These producers were taking these old funk and soul breaks, speeding them up to almost double their original tempo. We're talking about 160 to 180 beats per minute, then chopping them up and reconstructing them in ways that completely defied the technology of the time.
And they were doing all this with really basic equipment, right? Like old Akai samplers and primitive drum machines?
Exactly. And here's what's wild. These producers would spend literally days programming these complex drum patterns on hardware that had maybe 12 seconds of total sampling time. They had to get creative, using every trick in the book to squeeze more out of these limited machines.
The whole pirate radio aspect of this scene is just incredible too. These stations broadcasting from makeshift studios on top of high-rise buildings.
Oh man, the pirate radio story is crazy. These DJs would carry their entire studio setup, turntables, mixer, transmitter, everything, up dozens of flights of stairs in housing projects. They'd set up temporary antennas on the roof, always staying one step ahead of the authorities.
And this was all happening before the internet, before social media. These radio stations were literally the only way for this community to stay connected.
Right? And what's fascinating is how these stations became these vital community hubs. Like Cool FM wasn't just playing music, they were announcing parties, sharing news, connecting people. It was social media before social media existed.
Well, let's talk about those parties. These massive warehouse events that would draw thousands of people.
So these warehouse parties were something else entirely. You'd have these massive sound systems. We're talking about speaker stacks taller than houses, pumping out these sub-bass frequencies so powerful they could literally shake buildings from blocks away.
And this was all completely underground, totally DIY, right?
Completely DIY. And here's what's incredible. This scene created its own economy. You had record shops that became community centres, producers pressing their own vinyl, promoters organising events through word of mouth. It was like this parallel universe, operating completely outside the mainstream music industry.
The whole dubplate culture that emerged from this scene was fascinating too. These one-off acetate recordings that would literally wear out after about 50 plays.
Yeah, and that scarcity created this whole culture of competition between DJs. Like if you had an exclusive dubplate that nobody else had, that could make your reputation overnight. Some DJs would spend thousands of pounds just to have exclusive tracks cut to dubplate.
The influence of this movement is still felt today in so many ways. You can hear elements of jungle and drum and bass in everything from pop music to film scores.
And what's really interesting is how this music crossed cultural boundaries. You had people from all different backgrounds coming together. Caribbean sound system culture mixing with European electronic music, hip-hop influences from America, all creating something entirely new.
It really shows how powerful grassroots movements can be in shaping culture.
That's exactly it. And you know what's really striking? This whole movement happened because people refused to accept the limitations of what existed before. They didn't wait for permission or funding or corporate backing. They just created something new because they had to.
Looking back now, it seems almost impossible that something this influential could have started in such humble circumstances.
Well, that's what makes this story so powerful. It shows that real cultural change doesn't always come from the top down. Sometimes it comes from people in bedrooms and abandoned warehouses, pushing boundaries and creating something revolutionary simply because they can't help themselves.
And that's really the legacy of this movement, isn't it? It's not just about the music. It's about the power of community and creativity to change the world.
Exactly. And as we wrap up here, I think that's the big takeaway. When people come together with passion and creativity, they can create something that changes culture forever. It doesn't matter if they have the right equipment or the right connections. What matters is the vision and the determination to make it real.